Hey, Jeremy.
Okay. Welcome to our special session to discuss, the results of the earlier today SIG architecture meeting, and I actually really don't remember most of what the original reason for this meeting is beyond basically discuss what we're going to do for our API and try to actually, maybe not decide in this meeting, but brainstorm about our possibilities and try to maybe rank them or figure out what we think is best, what everybody else thinks is best, and I don't know, form a matrix and try to choose the least bad one. Does that sound about right for everybody else?
I like that. Choose the least bad, putting on that on the agenda.
It's
I don't know. I kind of like the idea of living in a matrix.
Well, I just meant, we can make one column is like what we think sig-arch is going to say, and one column what we think is the technical solution, and then one column of like what's the best user solution.
So
I think, yeah.
I was just wondering, can you elaborate? Are we, when you say this is about an API, or this call is about the API, is it in reference to this thing we talked about with SIG architecture, or is this just a broader issue? Okay.
Somewhat. It's not unrelated, but it's partially, if we're going to say, the beta version is the beta version, and yes, we're going to support it for 9 months, and basically, we have written down goals for V1. I'm concerned that they're not sort of up to date and realistic anymore, and that if we eventually get to V1 and basically we're releasing something that's already broken, and the correct working version is V2, and it has to be V2 because we said we're going to release V1 as V1, and I don't think we're at the point that everybody's going to be all of a sudden confused if we just say V1 is like the real thing, but maybe I think that's something we need to discuss. And
well, can I back up a little? Just ask, what is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Are we going to change the API, or are we going to get some kind of upstream solution? And if the upstream solution is you need to change the API, we need to kind of figure that out fast, sooner rather than later.
Right, but change the API for what? The delete problem, or for something else?
Delete, update, everything.
Okay,
yeah,
so it's all related to that.
Problem.
Okay. I want to make sure that there wasn't some other problem we were trying to possibly change the API for. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So actually, let's just rattle for a second. There is no update problem, is there, Morgan? Isn't this really specific about deletes?
The update is one facet of it. It's the delete thing's the key thing. The update thing is related to, we have the big lock on, colliding users, basically.
So you understand the big lock, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I thought we had fixed that one with a feature gate, and we were using the big lock on the feature gate.
Well, I think the question around that is, do we want to keep the big lock, or do we want to look at some alternative solutions, like somebody mentioned converting the request for an update into creating an object that goes into a queue. So you have a queue of pending update requests. That way you don't need a big lock. You just stick something at the end of the queue, and we pull things off the queue one at a time. I think that's the question we need to answer, is how do we want to solve that? Keep the current lock or switch to a queue. Okay. Or something else.
I do agree that, Jake, we need to kind of say that what you said, we should feature gate that. But if we do, yeah, I agree with that part, and I agree with Doug's part that we need to figure out if there is an alternative that's. But I think, during the meeting, we kind of did say that maybe the big lock is just something IBM does, and everybody else doesn't believe in the problem exists. So.
And just for the record, I don't view this as an IBM problem. I do view this as a spec compliance issue. I don't know, Noel will vehemently disagree, but that's okay.
Okay, so maybe we should just look at, I guess, our V1 thing and milestone. I guess that's on the wiki somewhere.
Yep.
Let me pull that up, and
It's our roadmap.
our roadmap. So V1 resource versions, right now we've got V1 beta 1, and that looks the way it does, and that has the behavior it does. And is everybody happy with that, I guess? I mean, maybe that's...
Are you jumping the gun a little, though, Morgan? In the sense that shouldn't we decide whether we need to think about API changes to solve these problems first? Because what if we decide to solve all these issues without having to change the API? Then asking that question may be not necessary.
Okay.
I think part of, Morgan, maybe we need to add something to the agenda, and we're not planning on covering it today, or maybe we are. But I think the question was been, if it's V1 beta 1, how long do we have to support it? And how long do we have to maintain backward compatibility with it, right?
Right.
Yeah, but I think Doug's right. First, we're really jumping the gun. We need to go back to what do we want to do? What were the options given us with sig-arch?
Yes.
And how do we want to move forward?
I agree. I'm just saying that's one of the questions that we've been talking about for a couple weeks now, and I certainly don't know the answer to it, and it's just one of those questions that we want to get answered at some point. How long is our backward compatibility with V1 beta 1?
The document says 9 months.
9 months, or as long as we're V1?
9 months. That's what.
Because that would be a little weird to say after 9 months you can break backwards compatibility but still call yourself V1.
No, you deprecate it, and then 9 months later you're allowed to remove it.
Really? So you can completely change your entire API and still call it version 1 as long as you do it over a 9 month period.
Well, you deprecate it and have a V2.
That's different.
Before we get into that, I'd really like to know what happened at sig-arch before we go into the deprecation question.
No, Carolyn, you're not allowed to know. It's a secret.
It's
That's why we're recording this, by the way, so that other people.
Yeah. Doug, you do that. That's you, Doug.
Okay. So I try my best to summarize the problem at a more abstract level rather than necessarily talking about delete. And so what I try to do is express the problem as we are managing resources that are outside of Kubernetes, and those resources, in essence, have a mind of their own. They are in control over what you're allowed to do. And we are not in a position to be able to do all the checks necessary in RBAC or admission controllers to know for sure whether the resource is going to allow us to perform this particular action. So therefore, we will not know whether the resource will say yes or no until we actually enter the reconciliation loop, which means after the spec has been updated. And when you update the spec, updates to the spec are problematic for us because we need to be able to figure out some way to roll back, but we kind of have a solution for that. So the real problem is delete, because once delete hits the spec, it's updated the delete timestamp, and there's no way in Kubernetes to roll that back. But I try not to focus too heavily on deletes and focus more on the abstract question of, does Kubernetes want to allow external resources to be in control as opposed to Kubernetes being in control? And we didn't get a definitive answer, which I wasn't looking for. It was more, the question was, do we want to explore this more? And the answer I got back was, poll the community to see if there's interest in forming a work group around this. And at least one person on the call said they are running into similar problems and they would be interested in participating in additional discussions. Does that summarize it well, Jay and Morgan, do you think?
I agree. This is my favorite slide, by the way, this one right here.
That's the best slide ever. What if?
Say who do you know what problem they're trying to solve, that they also have basically external source of truth?
It's basically they're integrating with external systems, and those external systems have their own rules and whatever that may not necessarily be represented be able to be representable inside Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm. So I remember in the mailing list, because that's what I've been following so far, is that they really were pushing hard, saying that we don't acknowledge situations where Kubernetes isn't the source of truth? Were they more open to that when you were talking to them?
I'd say
The
yes.
source of truth.
Yeah, I definitely think I think the answer has to be yes, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that they agreed that we want to support those use cases yet.
Yeah.
I think they said I think they're open for discussions about it. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Who was it that was so vocal in the email? He wasn't there. I'm trying to think of who that was.
So that was that Tim? Yeah, I think
Yeah,
was it
I think
Tim
it
or
was
Clayton?
Tim.
Yeah.
I think it was Tim.
And I was kind of disappointed that, well, obviously Tim's on vacation, I think, but I was
Right.
disappointed that Brian couldn't make it because I could have sworn in the past I've heard him talk about integrating with third-party systems, and we need to be able to support that. So I thought we might be able to get him on our side, but he wasn't on the call, so I don't know how he feels about it for sure.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, I honestly don't think this problem is insolvable. What's the challenge is getting people to expand their mind to allow for some additional flexibility where there isn't flexibility today. And I think this is really no different than any other extensibility point that Kubernetes has added, right? Whether it's, adding admission controllers, adding mutating webhooks, whatever you want to call it, those things didn't exist at one point in time, and then they added them. And somebody had to be convinced that it was worthwhile to add that flexibility point into the system. I think this is no different. It's just, for some reason, fiddling with the notion of delete sends people over the edge. And we need to figure out some way to get them over that hump.
I also didn't get the feeling that this was going to move very fast, or it's going to be hard to get it to move.
I totally agree. And that's why I think we probably need to come up with a, for lack of a better phrase, short-term solution. And I think Morgan's proof of concept stuff is probably on the right path. But that's just my opinion.
The other suggestion that Arch was pushing in the mailing list was you have an admin fix it. Is that right? Am I remembering what they were saying? Like, you just let it get stuck and you have an admin address it or delete it and recreate it, like remove the finalizer and just rebuild it? Or did they have more interesting suggestions than that?
No, I think you're right. I think Paul's the one who suggested something along the lines of an admin fixing it, which I don't like thinking of it that way because I don't think it's a fix per se. But ultimately, I think the way he would quote fix it would be to, yes, delete and recreate. And my biggest concern with that is if somebody is watching this resource that you're going to delete and they're going to take an action based upon the deletion timestamp being set, recreating the resource doesn't help because they've already taken some action, like perhaps started some cleanup process, right? And you can't get them to necessarily roll that back. So that's why I don't like the idea of delete and recreate.
Do people watch for the deleted event, which happens when it's finally removed from etcd, or are they watching the update event for when that delete timestamp is set? Because those are two different things.
I don't know the answer to that question, but the fact that you can watch for either tells me we have to code for them watching either.
I thought Morgan showed, or Morgan, I thought you had indicated that.
Okay. Yeah, I can. So given the way I've seen other controllers implemented, and I believe ours was the same way at one time as well, the cacher, watcher, lister thing, whatever that interface is. Actually, maybe I can pull it up. There's three call points, three callbacks, right? One for
Create,
adding, updating, and deleting, right? And those call to whatever code you want. You can set. I've seen them set to the same callback, so you can do that. At which point your code disambiguates between the three and then goes back through the normal code path. So thinking about it, what would each of those things look like, A, to that callback analyzer part, and B, once it goes in, right? So let's say you do the delete, you are going to get an update event and then a delete event. Like, that's what happens.
Yep.
Then it goes, then say those both call the same method, the same callback, and end up in your code. Okay, well, what is the update event? The update event is adding the deletion timestamp. So literally, the only point that we have, you can be looking at the deletion timestamp. At that point, you'll know, oh yes, this is going to be gone by X time. But when we say that, we're saying it's going to be gone from storage. And so the deletion timestamp is really the last key point where we can do something before it. After it, I don't see what we can do. I think the other aspect of it that came up was doing an update to the spec after the fact, which I don't think helps us. But I need to rethink it again.
I'm not really clear on what that last suggestion was. What do you make an update to the spec?
Doug.
I'm trying to remember. Is that
The way I heard that was something along the lines of, in some cases, if the update fails, you can change the spec and things will. Hang on, no, I'm not getting that right. But part of the problem with that statement around you could update things was you can't undo the delete. I mean, that was the bottom line, right?
Yeah. That's basically.
You can't undo the delete timestamp.
Yeah, but circling back around just for a sec to Carolyn's question about, well, do people watch the deleted timestamp versus do they watch for the actual delete from etcd itself? I'm not sure it matters, to be honest, because either way, that watcher is going to kick off some process when that process should not have been kicked off because we're going to recreate the object, right? So it doesn't matter what they're watching. The fact that they're watching it all for some sort of deletion message or event is enough for us to be worried.
Right.
I'm not so sure I'd be willing to support someone who said, I'm watching for a delete timestamp and assuming that it's going to happen. Because a valid thing to happen in Kubernetes is that delete timestamp gets set and then it stays in error for quite a while, right? Or does it eventually get removed no matter what?
Well, but like I was saying, though, it technically doesn't matter, right? Whether they're watching for the deletion timestamp or they're watching for the actual delete message from etcd for the resource, it like I said, it does not matter. Either way.
Well, it matters to me. I don't want to expend a ton of information supporting someone who I think is doing something that's counter to how you should be using Kubernetes in general, and we've told people not to do that in the first place.
No, my point is,
like kicking off unchangeable actions based off of an update func that could get changed in the future versus a delete, which semantically means delete. Like one, I'm willing to support. Another, I'm more willing to say to someone that they have been going down the wrong path. And I'm not interested in taking a ton of engineering time to support their one thing. You know what I mean? Well,
yes and no. I kind of understand what you're saying, but I still go back to, I don't think it matters. Because even if they do it the quote correct way, which I think you're saying is to watch for the delete as opposed to the update, right?
Supported is what I'd go with, but yeah.
Okay. Either way, if they're watching for the delete from etcd, we're screwed. Because that delete from etcd isn't real, because as soon as we delete it, we're going to recreate it. And that delete is going to trigger some cleanup action by this watcher, and we don't want that to happen. That's why I keep going back to, it does not matter what they're watching. The fact that they are watching for a delete of any kind is a problem.
Okay. Yeah. Well, unless we were allowed to undo the delete timestamp being set.
Well, yes, but I think that's just as problematic, because I think that's going to really rock people's brains, right? That's why I like Morgan's solution of, we're not setting delete timestamp. We're making it perfectly clear. We are requesting the delete to happen, and we can define the semantics of this flag that says, in such a way that's to make it perfectly clear, this flag may get reset back. So if you can watch it if you want, because we can't stop you, but be aware, just because this flag is set does not mean a delete is going to happen. It's just a request that may be rejected. And the problem is you can't make that kind of guarantee on the deletion timestamp, at least the way it's currently defined. So that's why I like Morgan's solution. It's introducing a new flag with new semantics that we get to define, and we're not going to break anybody because it's a brand new thing. Also, don't watch it ever. Oh yeah, but people can do whatever they want to do. But at least we've been very clear in the documentation to what to expect. And if they don't like what we wrote there, that's fine. But we're going to code it up that way. Bug report working as designed won't fix. Exactly.
I remember suggesting something last week, but I don't quite remember like what was brought up as like a really big problem with it. If deletes from the user, like a user initiated deletes, aren't allowed, and instead we relied on something like update index or relist index, we could have like unused index, basically saying like, we don't want it anymore, please try to get rid of it at some point, and here's some timeout for trying to get rid of it. And then having the controller handle that entirely, so that you never get into the delete state. That seems, the reason why I'm saying that is that it seems to me that one of the things that sig-arch was very concerned about was that by hijacking from Morgan's solution, by hijacking the delete, regardless of what Kubernetes does under the hood, it's confusing to people, and it seems counter to how people expect it to work. And so I was curious, if we went that other way and did something that maybe fit user expectations better, would that be a viable solution as well that we could consider in that working group?
But Carolyn, you're saying if you want to delete an instance, you no longer use the delete method. You use a update on request deletion or something like that, right? I mean, it's a change to the service catalog API. It's
less thinking about a delete and more saying, I'm done with this. Please clean it up if you can.
Right.
It's kind of like a counter who's interested in it or anything like that. I don't know how to basically
Is it on the object?
An update instead of a delete, but instead of calling it delete, like get rid of that word entirely because it sets up expectations, and instead reframe it as something else that fits better with user expectations and kind of works with what sig-arch was trying to suggest, I guess.
Yeah, I see. My point of view on that is I agree with you 100%. That can technically work. That's not the problem. The problem is whether people will accept the delete not being a valid action, the HTTP delete not being a valid action. If we could get everybody, including someone like Null, to say, yes, we are going to turn off delete for all use cases, for all uses of service catalog on service instances and service bindings, and you have to go through this request delete flag type of mechanism, I could live with that because at least then it's consistent for all deployments of service catalog.
Would it necessarily need to be no opt-in, but just like, because right now, like for example, Big Lock is opt-in. Is there a reason, like someone like Null who wanted to just YOLO do things a specific way could say, I'm going to change my RBAC to allow deletes, and then otherwise everyone by default goes through a more staged, safer like process?
No, yeah, the problem is you have an I don't know whether you call it interoperability or portability problem, but you have some sort of problem along those lines, because what you then have is I have a script that works on one platform because it does a delete, and I take that exact same script and take it over to a different platform, and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. I now have to set a flag instead of do a delete. So my application is not, my scripts are not portable anymore.
And we do have that problem with pretty much anything that relies on a feature flag, though, right?
Yep. Yes. And this is part of the reason why I keep phrasing this as a spec compliance issue, because I don't like the idea of this stuff being behind a feature flag, but if it is behind a feature flag, I think we need to be spec compliant by default, and people need to go out of their way to violate the spec. And that's why I think the big lock needs to be on by default, in my opinion.
I'm kind of in Carolyn's camp. I would, Doug, I think you want to have a hard time, changing Niall's mind and probably those from Red Hat about going to a request deletion instead of a deletion. But it does seem to me that we could straddle both camps with a optional, one is a kill and one is a, hey, you know, when you can clean this up and remove it.
And to be clear, what I'm trying to do is explore what can we do now without holding up 1.0, and what are things that we'd like to take to this working group for a long-term solution, and just understand what our options are, so we know, like, is it even worth presenting something to people, or have we already poked enough holes in it that we should set it aside? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And, you know, I'm all in favor of brainstorming different options to see what we can do. But one thing I don't quite understand, though, maybe you guys can help me wrap my head around this, is if you look at something like Morgan's solution, right, where the delete gets mapped to setting of the delete requested flag, and then under the covers, eventually that gets translated to setting a deletion timestamp, right? What I don't understand is if all that is hidden from the user, why is that a problem? They should never know of this intermediate step of setting their delete requested flag. They will never see it. They'll never know it happened.
Yeah.
Why is this a problem?
To be clear, my concern is less with his change for aggregated API. Like, it's slightly confusing, but I feel it's pretty on par with how delete works today, so I don't care. Because if you don't get it, like, you probably don't understand how Kubernetes delete works anyway, as you've pointed out. But when we move to CRDs, I believe that option is removed from the table, and I'd like to understand what the continuity of user experience would be between 1.0 and CRDs, and just make sure that we don't paint ourselves into a corner if we decide to go down that route.
Gotcha.
Like,
okay.
If it's a temporary solution that we're going to have to break UX for in 6 months or whatever, then I'm a little worried about that.
No, that's a very valid point. So let me make sure. Let me catch up with you guys, because I feel like I'm behind on this one. So with CRDs, this option of sort of intercepting the delete, is that not available?
Correct.
It's the core API server handling it.
So what do they do? Well, so with CRDs, they go and set the deletion timestamp, and that's or do they?
It should.
Delete
it should be an API object.
So
basically, Morgan's fix rests in the API server, and when we move to CRDs, we don't have a custom API server anymore. So we just have what we can do today in our own controller, and that's right. Where, like, because of the location of where his fix goes in, we won't have that as an option.
Gotcha. And to be clear, all CRDs have, in essence, that metadata section. You don't have a choice as a CRD author.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't speak to any of this. I'd have to do research.
Yeah, I'd like to just double check all this stuff, because I want to make sure that CRDs have a deletion timestamp, for example. Do we know that for sure? That every single one of them must go through that process of deletion timestamp, as opposed to just a straight delete?
The last time I worked with it was February, but that's how I recall it working. Okay. I have code on my machine. I could check.
Okay. I trust Carolyn. Doug?
I'm sorry, what?
No, Carolyn said she that's how it works.
Yeah,
I'll double check in case we should look at that further. But otherwise, like I said, I did a whole prototype with the shadow resourcing that Morgan and I were talking about before. I did that a couple months ago, so I can look it up and see. I don't believe that's changed.
Okay, I suspect you're probably right, because otherwise they wouldn't be advocating for using CRDs for everything.
Yeah.
So I don't like that term, shadow resourcing, without oh, I guess you are saying it. Morgan, shadow resourcing is your change that you have working, right?
No. I don't think anybody's done any of this. I mean, Carolyn says she has one.
Sorry.
I was talking. I thought I saw you typing shadow resource someplace.
Yeah, I'm putting it on our list.
It's further down. We haven't covered it yet. Is that right?
Yeah, okay, I mean, we haven't explicitly covered it. We've mentioned it.
Okay, thanks.
I was putting it on our list as we should talk about it.
So Carolyn, question for you.
Yeah.
When we switch over to CRDs, does the resource model change in terms of what people will see in terms of what they watch or listen to and stuff like that, or is it all transparent to them?
It was completely transparent to them. I was able to take SVCat and basically point it at my CRDs instead of the real like service instances and things like that, and get pretty much everything to work. I just had to switch which type I was talking to the whole time. So the idea with the shadow resourcing or just CRDs in general is that it's still it's the exact same client that we generate ourselves and check in, our generated client. It's no different whatsoever. It's just a matter of like, they have some default plumbing in API server and the storage side to like plumb everything through. And then they give you nice little places for your controller. And you don't have as many like full control over the life cycle and like all the hooks and everything.
Yeah, but for
the user, it looks the same other than the presentation in kubectl, which we've seen.
Right, but I guess so the type and kind and everything remains the same. So an application I write that watches a cluster service broker today and create or interacts with cluster service brokers today, either through puts, deletes, gets, and through watches and stuff, not a single line of code needs to change when we go to CRDs.
As long as they don't rely on unsupported things, like for example, arbitrary sub-resources, yes, it's the code is exactly the same. It generates the same.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So the suggestion we have third on the list here, shadow resourcing. So when I first implemented the concept of how to set up like default provisioning parameters so that someone could, as a day zero trial, like say I want to install something and I don't want to understand any of the parameters. The way I did that is I basically put a CRD in front of all of Service Catalog that I called shadow, doesn't matter. And then the user interacted with that. And then my controller essentially handled performing actions on behalf of that user's CRD and then applying them back on our existing service instances and everything. So like not a single line of Service Catalog changed, and I was able to just sync it all over. And as far as the user was concerned, they like pretty much ignored anything related to Service Catalog. They ignored the service instances and classes and plans and everything else, and only saw my CRDs. And I think this is something Morgan and I were talking about, that we could implement that with CRDs in the future or API servers now. And that kind of fits a little bit with what Paul was suggesting, where it's like we do the delete immediately on our CRD, but someone maybe is keeping track of what actually charges people money, which would be the real backing service instances, and could identify ones that were stuck, essentially. So that was kind of like the third option we're looking at here. I don't know if people had opinions or thoughts on the UX for that.
If you can't delete the resource, it's recreated in the CRD?
We could have a couple options. We could either have that CRD completely go away and say, as far as user concern, it's gone, and it would be a problem for the administrator. That was something that Paul was throwing out as an option. The other option is that someone could recreate it, like that our CRDs would be recreated, and we'd tell people, don't start watching these CRDs, watch the true backing resource before taking destructive actions, essentially.
So basically all instances and bindings would actually be two objects.
Potentially, right? Or some solution, Paul threw out like we'd only make those in case of emergency, like when we really can't delete things. But the other idea is just you shadow everything, and it's only ones that are missing their CRD buddy, like their user-facing resource, that we basically call stuck, that requires attention.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled with the idea of some sort of weird state where the administrator needs to fix it. The idea of saying there's two resources for all instances, and when a delete happens, you're always deleting the shadow resource, as you call it. And it's only when the broker says yes, then we delete the real resource. But if the broker says no, then we recreate the shadow resource. And we explicitly say in the documentation, you can watch instances all you want, but make sure you're watching the real instance, not the shadow, because those are transient, right? As long as we very clearly define that in our specification, then we have an out that says, hey, if you're watching the wrong thing, that's your problem. We told you not to.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely one option. I went one step further and actually put the real ones that I didn't want the user interacting with in a different namespace so that they weren't tempted to see it and wonder what they were and poke them as well. But I guess with RBAC, you could do essentially the same thing to prevent people from looking at those and wondering what's going on.
Yeah, we'd have to.
I agree. It would require some careful user messaging to train people on this model if we went down that path.
Yeah, because I mean, the naming of these things would be kind of funky, right? I mean, when you want to do a list to see what's in there, which one do you list, right? And then when you start doing pointers between things, if I want to create my own resource and point to a service instance, I need to make sure that someone doesn't point to the shadow. They always point to the real one because the shadow could go away. So
I went down the path of making a different kind for the user-facing CRD versus the shadow, or I don't know what the names are, but the one that actually represents the true state of the world, and the other one that represents the user intent or the spec.
Right.
They ended up being separate CRDs, so I could RBAC them differently, and also because, like you said, otherwise it's really hard to just show the ones that matter when you do, kubectl get.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to wrap my head around how the user kind of almost has to know about the two resources, right? Because if you want to have something that points to an instance, you probably don't want to point to the shadow. Well, maybe it doesn't matter. No, yes, I don't think you want to point to the shadow. You probably want to point to the real one, right? But then
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I had the user only link things together that were the shadows. Let's all agree that shadow means the one that the user works with. So I had say for instance, the shadow binding connected directly to the shadow instance, and my controller handled mirroring that onto the actual service instance and binding so that it used the correct references. Does that make sense? So like the user would see one thing and they'd have one connection between those two resources, and then I would have that same connection between the real ones that the broker is managing, and there wouldn't be cross references between the shadow and the actual instances, for example.
Carolyn, can you remind me what the motivation was that made you go down this path?
Oh yeah, sure. So I wanted to rapid prototype how service catalog could look if we had the ability to default provisioning parameters, binding parameters, what is it called? Secret transformations, things like that. It's kind of related to the kind proposal that Kent made last week at the OSB group. And I want to be able to put this all together without actually changing service catalog. So I was able to just put these CRDs in front with a simple controller. And the controller basically handled mapping the intent that was represented by those CRDs, filling in parameters and things like that, and then making the real service instances and bindings behind the scenes, essentially. So the user would see one thing, and then service catalog would be giving the full set of information to the broker.
Right.
The user didn't have to worry about all that extra information. And just let me do it a lot faster than changing our code.
Yeah, thanks. No, that makes sense. I guess I'm having a hard time convincing myself that the shadow makes sense for, I see it gets us out of the whole thing with, we're locked into an API, but we can't undo a delete, so we don't want to do a delete. But It feels pretty heavy-handed. Yeah,
my point, I guess, is not saying this is the thing I'm backing. I'm saying that this is a viable option, at least on a technical standpoint, right? So if we were going to go to the working group and say, here are some of the different ways we've figured out how to work with our problems. We have Morgan's change, which could be ported upstream in some fashion so that it would be available to everyone, or, just so that we don't just narrow in on one thing. And then we kind of don't know how to respond if people throw out other ideas or roadblocks. This kind of gives us bigger.
No, agreed. I think it's a good option to explore. It just feels complex, and it's kind of like it's one more thing to get out of sync, and like, oh god, this is gonna be a mess.
It is. And the reason, like, to be clear, I did that as a rapid prototype, not as a real implementation that I would have shipped.
Right. Okay.
But it is, unfortunately, it is one of the options we have up here if we can't work with sig-arch to change things, right? So it sounds like they were more willing to, they sounded, from what you said, that they were really shutting things down in the mailing list, but seemed more open.
I don't know if it was more open or just a way to deal with it and say, that's not our problem yet. You know, go and prove that other people want this, and then come back to us when you have, you know, an army of people behind you. And
oh, okay.
But I mean, it didn't go. It wasn't an extremely negative conversation at all.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I kind of thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Considering their response when they wouldn't even let Doug ask the question when we were there at the face-to-face last week, I'm surprised that they were a little less like fingers in the air going, nope.
Yeah, I think it was a different group of people somewhat. And, you know, you're more, well, I was going to say more facilitative in a face-to-face, even on video, but that's not true.
So Carolyn, and I really apologize if you've already done this, but have you actually like written down the sort of the design of this shadow resource solution?
I have to dig it up. This was like I said, February. I can see what survived at this point because the whole thing got flipped around when I translated it to the real long-term changes to service catalog. But I can try to find it.
Well, because I wouldn't mind looking at your idea on paper so that I could really digest it, because I love Morgan's solution that is headed down. I actually think it is the right long-term solution, but you're mentioning the problem with CRDs is such a big wrinkle in heading down that path that I really want to understand your solution better.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find.
You know, and maybe Morgan's solution is, maybe it's not the one we go with right now. Maybe it is your shadow thing. And maybe instead we use Morgan's thing as a proof of concept to convince SIG architecture or API server group, whatever, that maybe they need to allow this kind of flexibility. And here's a proof of concept that shows it's not as bad as they think it is. I don't know.
You show them this and they think it's so ugly that they like the other proposal now.
Yeah, see, but one of my bigger concerns though with the shadow thing is if we go with the shadow thing and then a miracle happens and SIG architecture or API server decides to allow some flexibility to do what we want the more real way that we want to do it, that's going to be an API change for us. And which means we'd have to jump up to version 2 just to support this.
Can you help me understand a little bit further? Because I would have expected we have 2 sets of resources. What if we continued exposing service instance and service binding, service plan, class, whatever? Those continue to be exposed to the user. And then we make some new temporary CRD that we rely upon, whatever, backing service instance, I don't care, names are hard. And then if we get what we eventually want upstream, we just stop using those, but the resources that we've been using all along continue to be the same.
But those resources that continue to live on, the same as you said, are those the shadows or the real one?
So right now, people watch service instance, etc., right? And they kind of act off of it. If we were able to say, starting at V1, don't watch those, oh, I see what you're saying. I finally found it. Yeah, because we would tell people to watch whatever is backing it.
Right.
We would have to tell them to change that if we switched it around, which to them would be a different set of everything, all different types. Yeah.
So I think we're screwed no matter what. But okay, but if nothing else, I still want to better understand your proposal, because maybe after reading it I'll realize maybe this is the right way to go, or maybe it can be tweaked. and make everybody happy. I don't know. I just want to better understand it.
Yeah, to be honest, I think all of these are awkward workarounds for this UX problem we have. And it's just a question of what can we do short term and long term that's least disruptive, tech debt.
Yes.
For the UX and for us.
So just since we're recording this call, I'd like to officially go on the record. I think Kubernetes' decision to make the user-facing API match one-to-one with the backing store resources is a huge mistake because it does not allow you to change one without changing the other. And that just is, as you see, is causing nothing but problems. So I just want to get that on the record.
Okay, Jonathan, sorry.
I had a question just to make sure I'm on the same page as everybody else is. So the reason we want to be able to switch to CRDs, the actual end goal is to get rid of the API server entirely, right? That's what we want.
That would be one of the results of switching to CRD, yeah.
But is that why we want to do it?
No, we want to do. Why do we want to do CRD? Is that the question?
Yeah.
There was multiple reasons there. One of the original ones was the Microsoft and Google interest, particularly was we do not want to have to run our own etcd server, and we have to do that right now.
We don't want to have a separate etcd server from the cluster level one, yeah.
Right, and the cluster level one, most people, I guess, don't trust that we won't blow it up on accident, even though I find that a strange argument because we're using the API machinery from the cluster. So,
Wait, I'm sorry, who do you mean by who doesn't trust us?
The upstream, whatever core Kubernetes API people say, no, we're never going to expose
Okay.
the cluster etcd because we think you might accidentally blow it up. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay. So,
And I don't have this concern for all the other various and sundry teams that work on core Kubernetes.
I don't understand the question.
It seems like they're singling us out in that respect. I mean, we're an add-on component, sure, but like,
Yeah, no, I agree.
core API lets you do all kinds of stupid things.
I have no rational argument for you there.
okay. So to summarize though about why we were evaluating CRDs just at a high level, it was the ability to have us just use the clusters at CD. It was to reduce the effort on our part to sync up with all the copy-pasted, aggregated API code, etc., that happens at the Kubernetes minor releases. And because as a whole, the community seems to be like narrowing in on that and moving forward with it. And we'd like to be able to take advantage of innovation and just wheels that other people have invented as we go forward instead of sticking on something that it appears people are saying you should probably switch off of this. We don't want to support it long term.
Okay, cool.
Next, so we don't like anything. Okay, so shadow resourcing sort of almost definitely breaks our API unless we, I guess, tell. I mean, there's no way to get around it, I don't think, with the same API, even if we had shadow resources, because you'd have to talk to the. If we created, I don't know. I have to think about that some more. Is there a non-impacting short-term V1 thing available to us at this moment? I guess is the question.
Sorry, say it again, Morgan.
What can we do? I guess there's two questions. Do we have to make a change right now? And if we do have to make a change, what can we do short term and still not impact the V1 compatibility or release in any fashion?
I don't think we can answer that until we've decided how we're going to solve this problem, at least short term. And I think there's two things that have to happen there. One is that I think Carolyn should write down her proposal for the shadow resource so we can all evaluate it. And I think it's worthwhile for you to continue down the path of finishing up your proof of concept so people can see how scary that code is, or not scary, depending on how you want to look at it.
Well, I mean, the code is the code.
For that, it's helpful what Morgan was going down, which is identifying which one of these is even a viable short-term solution that doesn't just push down the road people having to make breaking API changes. Like, which one of these would include breaking API changes? All of them?
Yeah. So maybe what the first step right now is to enumerate all the different options that we've thought of, and then for each one assign an owner to sort of make sure that it's understandable by the full group. Whether that means, Morgan, show them your PR, or Carolyn, you show them a Google Doc with the description of it, or whatever. And then for each one, enumerate, long-term, short-term impact. Does it work now? Will it continue to work when we go to CRDs? Those kind of things.
I'd be more than willing to help on the CRD shadow doc, at least for review. If I mean, I'm pretty sure I've done the same thing, but I'd like to let me dig out my slides and yeah, I think I have at least some of this thought out to contribute, but definitely want to see that and agree with you on it. So.
Morgan, would you like to take point then on just kind of at a high level figuring out the pros and cons of shadow resourcing? I'm happy to help with any experience I've had with that. Because
yeah, I can write up.
It's not my favorite solution, to be honest, considering I think the middle one maybe has the least disruptive migration path if we do get a good resolution out of the working group.
What's the middle one again?
The middle one is having deletes disallowed for the moment.
Yeah, so that's a new API.
Oh, got it. Okay.
It would be a new API now, but as we transition to CRDs and eventually maybe getting something out of the working group, it wouldn't result in further changes.
Agreed. I think it's probably the least kludgy thing.
It would be a new API for 1.0, but maybe not a breaking API down the road.
Wait, this is the one where we basically ban deletes and you have to go through setting a flag to do delete, right?
Or you get to choose your method of death.
Yeah. Yeah, where's that one? Do we have the YOLO option on there somewhere?
Well, I think that could be part of this, is that, either you turn this on or you continue to just use the deletion timestamp. I'm not saying that that's the right way, and that, Doug, I heard you speak about the spec and don't want multiple implementations. And you do one thing on one platform, it should work the same way on another platform. But it kind of also feels like a feature gate.
Well, let's just make sure we have all the options enumerated. Yeah. I like that. I like the way you're describing it, though. Choose your own death.
Yeah, okay. All right, put that on there too as another. So just to make sure what we're all doing, I'll write up well, I'm gonna put numbers on this. Option 3.
Numbers, that's a good idea.
Option 1, option 4. I'll write up just very high level, 1 page, what it would look like for number 3 and where we would see breaking changes, like right now before 1.0, if we got a good resolution from working group, that kind of stuff. That sound good? But I don't know. I'm not too keen on the shadow solution. I'm sharing it because it's a technical solution, but there's a reason why we didn't go forward with it at Microsoft, and it's because it's complicated.
I agree exactly with what you said.
Yep.
It is technically correct and awful user experience.
Well, the user experience wasn't so bad.
Yeah. If you wrap a CLI around it, if you wrap an actual client around it, I'm sure the user experience is fine. As an API,
it's confusing.
It's kind of what it should be, to be honest, because spec and status shouldn't be tied together, except they should be sort of. But yeah.
Yeah. If you look at it just from the user's perspective, it was fine as a UX.
Right.
But from a system administrator's perspective, us developing it,
Yes.
someone just looking at like the overall system architecture, it's a head scratcher.
It's a toilet.
How come our things always keep coming back to unfunctional?
That's why I want to see it written down so I can look at it more, because I agree. I'm of two minds of it.
I really don't think it's that complicated, considering we already managed the spec status divide. What is this but that writ larger?
Yeah, it's once removed, and I don't know. It feels like it's going to be there.
Delete only half of it, you know.
It's just another level of indirection, essentially.
I can fix anything with one level of indirection. That's a classic solution.
I think I had a professor in college who said something to the effect of, there's no problem that can't be solved by adding another layer of abstraction, and there's no
pretty much
performance problem that can't be solved by removing a layer of abstraction.
Pretty much. Yeah. So next steps would be looking into these, but Doug, are you leading a working group on the whole, what can we do long-term upstream? Do we still have a Doug? Oh no, there's no more Doug left. Does that mean we can sign Doug up for this because he's just not here?
What time? Oh, did he really drop it like the exact second?
I mean, he's not in the meeting anymore.
I don't see him there. Hey, Morgan, I'm giving you the fun job of informing Doug that he's going to leave that working group.
I'm totally leading the working group. Absolutely.
And then the working group can look at these 3 options and maybe come up with, or 4 options and look at some more.
So I'm starting to write up on CRD's shadow thingy, yes?
Yep.
Please, if you have time, that'd be great.
I've got some slides I can pull some stuff from.
Okay. Mostly I'm super burned because when I did this in February, like the response, like Jeremy can tell you like what Kent told me. It made me feel bad. It's like, I don't want to have to push for it again if I don't really believe in it.
Yeah, no, I know what I know exactly what you're saying. I've seen this. I think having I mean, I did a presentation on that concept, so I know exactly the weirdness that people they go, huh? But I'll write out, you know, what exists.
Okay. And 2, you already wrote up, so we don't need to do anything more on that one. And I think 1 seems pretty clear, actually. Or do we want to have someone just make something really small that explains it? Basically your PR that you did last month.
Pretty much.
Okay. When would we like to meet back up and kind of figure out what to do with all this?
When is a good time? I mean, I'm gonna bring this up as often as I can, basically. I want to get this done. You know, I want to stop the recording now. No, but I want to get this done.
Feel free to stop.
You know, I've been at least partially raising this for a while now, and we've sort of gone through consensus and then back out a couple of times, and you know, that's that's where we are. So I want to be somewhere new and not here. So
I assume we don't have enough time to just present what we find on Monday's meeting, or could we just do that?
I mean, I can. I definitely want to bring it back up on Monday. What is it, Thursday now? Is Monday is soon enough for everybody to do a review of what everybody is going to write up, and then can we have the write-ups done by Monday? And then when can we schedule the next one of these? For Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, and I don't want to have to try to schedule something once a week for the next several weeks. I'd like to. I don't know if we can agree on us attending something right now, but
I am concerned that we are going to that there's going to be considerable pushback on any of these, and it's going to be a big time sink, and it's going to be hard to get consensus. But I guess we'll get there when we get there.
We got it. I understand that. We need to do something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm not saying because it's difficult we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying it's because of the time zone. It's difficult to get everybody.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can wake up early for the next couple of weeks if that helps. So.
Well, I don't think it's going to take a week of meetings. I hope.
Yeah.
I can't really help you out with who are all the stakeholders on this.
Yeah, I know.
Our charter says in order to move forward on anything, we need either lazy consensus or 50% of maintainers who bother to vote. So I mean, hopefully we can move forward with something based off of that. Because I guess otherwise we just stay with what we have. I mean, that's basically number one, right?
And actually, that should be listed on here. Maybe that's a number 0 or something. I think there's going to be folks that say that what we're doing is the right way to do it with Cube.
Okay.
Right.
Without warping the API.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
So we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll write it up. We'll present it on Monday. Maybe we can send out a doodle or something today to get people who want to talk a little more in depth, and then we'll vote the week after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do fast. I think I'm tired.
Yeah, sure. I'll make another one today and send it out. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Morgan.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Can you give me? Yeah. Okay.
What's up?
Any minor guidance on when people are available?
I am out the first week of August.
I meant during the day.
Oh, I'm available all next week. Don't worry about it. Just send something out.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Same for me.
And I'll try to be flexible.
Okay. Super duper.
Great.
I appreciate it. I'll see you then.
All right.
Stop the recording. See you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.